Okay, hello, welcome back to another video on the Will Taylor Chess channel. Today I am once again blessing your screens with the tactical genius of international master Emory Tate. I am not joking when I say the game I'm showing you today is his most ruthless game that he ever played. Why is it his most ruthless, I hear you ask? Well, the game was played on the 10th of November in 2001 in round 2 of the Kings Island Open against a man by the name of Jae Kwon. And when I say a man, I mean a boy. An 11-year-old child from Canada, already showing the signs of eventual chess greatness with a rating of 2272 before his 12th birthday. A quick side note, I did a bit of research and I found out that this was the only game in the tournament that Tate played. That means he turned up, missed round 1, played round 2 and just battered an 11-year-old kid and then just left. Anyway, let's establish something very clearly first. Just because your opponent is an 11-year-old child does not mean that you shouldn't take them extremely seriously as a chess opponent. If you play chess online, I guarantee you've lost to some 11-year-old kid sitting there just you've lost to an 8-year-old probably. I myself lost to an 11-year-old semi-recently in an over-the-board tournament, and there have been and will be many more child prodigies who are entirely capable of destroying adult grandmasters. The reason that I love this game so much is because even though this is undoubtedly the case, the level of soul-destroying, ambition-crushing domination that Emory Tate shows this child over the board is just insane. Stick around until the end to see what I mean. I guarantee you will not regret it. Let's get into the game. So, Kwon has the white pieces, Tate has the black pieces, and Kwon opens with the move d4. Now, immediately, Tate goes for something a little bit offbeat. Instead of playing d5 or like knight f6, some kind of Indian, he plays c5 here, the old Benoni. Now, this is a personal favorite of mine, and it is a way to really annoy d4 players who just want to play a Queen's Gambit or a London system and move on with their life. Because if you try and play a London system here, we're going to take, and if Queen takes, we're going to go here. You're going to have to move the Queen again, and your whole London system's messed up. This immediate tension results in the best move for masters being to push past, claim some more space, and this is of course what Kwon does. Now just briefly, we are going to go through the first portion of this game relatively quickly and then slow it down for the endgame, because the endgame is where you see you'll see what I mean. But Tate goes for e6, c4, a trade in the center here, and then d6, achieving the characteristic Benoni pawn structure. Now you might be looking at this thinking, I mean, how is this useful? You've completely killed your dark square bishop's avenue of development towards the queen side. Why would you do this? Well, this is completely established theory. There was in fact a Magnus Carlsen Anish Giri game played in this exact line in 2022. However, after knight to c3, it is here that Tate plays a move only played 6% of the time in the Masters database, and that move is bishop to e7. Now, we just mentioned how this bishop is completely curtailed by the pawn structure that Tate has chosen to go for. And so, generally speaking, the best idea is to play g6, bishop g7, and whack that bishop on the beautiful long diagonal, leaving it fianchettoed and well placed on g7, then knight f6, and you can castle behind there. Instead, as I said, Tate plays bishop e7, and after knight f3, bishop to f6. He's just invested 2 moves in developing this bishop. Now, you might think, okay, but now the bishop's still on a good diagonal, it's going to be a strong piece. Kwon plays g3, Tate develops the knight, Fianchetto is the light square bishop, and after we see these 2 moves invested in the bishop, Tate just trades it off. And here we see the main idea of his opening initially is just he wants to just get rid of that dark square bishop. He doesn't care if it takes him 3 moves, he wants to get rid of it and have the knights that can bounce around in the closed position. Immediately here he plays a slight inaccuracy, but something that is guaranteed to take his opponent out of any opening preparation if bishop e7 hadn't already done it, and plays queen to a5. Seemingly the immediate idea is to take on c3, although to be honest, if Kwon castles, as he actually does, you don't really want to take here, because then we see bishop to f4 with tempo on the backwards pawn on d6, a backwards pawn being one that cannot be defended. It is stuck back behind the pawns in adjacent files. We're going to refer to that term quite often. And then eventually some rook c1, like this pawn's not worth grabbing. So why does Tate go queen a5? Well, after, as I said, Kwon castles, he now just develops the knight. He just develops the knight to e7. And you're sitting here thinking, why has he put his queen on a5? I mean, how does this make any sense? He's not going for this pawn. We see bishop to f4 now, and here the queen drops back to a6. Tate has gone out with the queen and dropped it back to allow the queen to defend the backwards d6 pawn from here. This is obviously the biggest weakness in Tate's position, just structurally speaking, but also the queen keeps her watchful eye over the c4 square. And as you'll see, that becomes a very crucial part of this game. Now, we're not going to try and appeal to the engine too much during this analysis. I think it's not so useful in terms of teaching people. In terms of just, experiencing a game of chess as a story, as a narrative, I don't think it's that useful to constantly be looking at the engine. But briefly, I will say, the engine suggests queen d3, and to be completely honest, Tate's queen is a bit misplaced here. But Kwon does not go for queen d3. Kwon instead plays e4 here. Now, knight to g6, putting pressure on the bishop. The bishop then steps back, and Tate just castles. Here we see Kwon go for queen to c2, a really pleasant move, connecting the rooks, allowing them both maximum maneuverability to maybe the B, the C, the D, or the E files. Either of them can get to any of those files. Also adds a bit of stability to this pawn. Also prepares the idea of pushing the C pawn to then stabilize this further. Tate goes knight to b6, anticipating this idea of the push of the C pawn. The knight drops back to d2, again fighting to push that C pawn. Tate plays bishop to d7, just, ready to bring the bishop out along this diagonal potentially, also connecting the rooks, and in general just developing the bishop. And finally Kwon goes for c4, seemingly achieving everything he ever wanted, completely dominating a space advantage, and eventually it looks really scary to play here as black, because you're just going to get hit with f4, you're going to get hit with e5, probably f5, some huge pawn storm with a space advantage down the center of the board, and it's not so obvious what to do here as black until you notice Tate's very well placed knight that can hop in to e5, applying yet again more pressure to c4. And we do see the idea and the merit of queen to a6 after queen a5, queen a6, that weird opening idea that's now paying off. Kwon chooses to defend it with the rook, of course, but you see that his pieces are beginning to be tied up defending a backwards pawn. I mean, we talked about our pawn being backwards. That's now no longer under attack. This backwards pawn is definitely under attack. And so after drawing 3 of Kwon's pieces to defend this weak pawn here, Tate just switches it up completely and plays f5. Now, f5 is a really instructive move here when you have a closed pawn structure. Always looking for the potential pawn breaks either side of that structure are going to be kind of the keys to making explosive and useful plays. He's basically looking to open up the f file, improve his rook, also probably challenge white's claim to the center. The bishop comes back to f4. Rook a to e8, again you see the rooks brought to the e and f files, kind of optimizing his pieces as best as he can with this lack of space advantage. Takes, rook takes, we do see f4, the rook steps back, and then rook to e1 here. Again, we're going to move through it quite quickly up until the defining moment of the game, which we are about to get to. So Tate stacks his rooks on the e file, completely useful idea. It is the only semi-open file on the board for him. He has 7 pawns, the only pawn missing is an e pawn. Whack your rooks on that file, classical stuff. And here, Kwon plays king to f2. Bringing his king into the game. We see g6 from Tate, queen c3, immediately hopping on that dark squared diagonal that Tate has just weakened by playing g6, f takes e4, knight takes e4, and here, this is the defining moment of the game for me. In this position, Tate plays queen takes c4. This is not the most accurate move. You will see the eval bar has slightly adjusted here. After queen takes, knight takes, I mean, find the move for white here. It's not that hard. Knight f6, it's a simple fork. He hits the king, he hits the rook. Tate has not missed this. He has intentionally allowed this fork to happen, such that after he moves his king, knight takes, he's lost a rook, he sacrificed the exchange, bishop takes, this very natural trade. I mean, Kwon is completely right to try and do this. He's up material, why not trade down? And at this point, Kwon improves his bishop, and if we just take a step back, Tate has a knight and a pawn for a rook. And here we're going to take a step back all the way to move 2, where we saw d5 played. There is a potential argument from a hypermodern standpoint in chess that when you play a move like this, you are overextending your pawn. Now, this pawn can be structurally defended in 2 different ways. It can be defended with c4, it can also be defended with e4. This game has progressed as such that Tate has basically focused his whole game plan on putting pressure on c4 with the queen on a6, with the knight then coming to b6, the other knight then coming to e5. He's played f5 to challenge the e4 pawn. He's basically in this position challenging both of the potential supporters of this pawn that was originally extended perhaps a little too far into the black position. As the game then progressed, we saw that he ended up removing that pawn on e4, then removing the pawn on c4, and even though he's lost an exchange, this pawn on d5 is now very close to all his pieces as a target potentially for him to attack, and if he can get the king in somehow, and it's isolated. He has removed the potential to defend it at all, and he's got a knight and a pawn for that. If he can get this pawn as well, he will have 2 connected passed pawns in this endgame, soon to be 3 as he can launch these pawns forward. While Kwon has the technical material advantage, +5 for a rook, +4 for a knight and pawn, Tate's advantage is a far more subtle, far more nuanced, but far more positionally threatening, complete array of all 4 pawns on the queen side that will march against 2 very weak, very isolated, potentially going to fall white pawns. And this is exactly what we see happen. The bishop comes to e4, b5, he marches forward. The king comes across, I mean, it's got to get under these pawns somehow to try and stop them. This is an 11-year-old child watching international master Emory Tate push pawns towards the end of the board. He's going to try and prevent it. Tate just carries on. b4, he pushes forward again. Rook to c1 attacking the knight steps back. King to e3, and Quan seems to be doing everything right. He's bringing his king in, he's got, you know, his bishop well centralized, his rook's on a semi-open file at least. You know, what's going wrong here? Because you see the evaluation slowly starting to favor Emory. Well, bishop to f7, putting pressure on this d-pawn, of course. He then has to defend it with the rook, okay, but now both your pieces are tied down to defending the pawn. So a5, and then a4. And here Quan makes a pretty critical mistake. I mean, at this point it is still probably an objective draw somehow. Very, very dynamic. Probably it wouldn't end in a draw between two humans ever. But the mistake Quan makes is playing f5. Now this is not an obvious mistake at all, but the main issue is f5 means Tate's king can get into f6, and it can get in here and it can walk on the dark squares. This light square bishop is a useless piece when it comes to the dark squares. It has 50% of the board as its global mobility. It can only see half of the squares. We see Tate take, pawn takes, and king f6. He's now about to march in. If you're wondering what he should have played, he should have gone for g5, preventing any entry here, and this would have been much harder then for Tate to convert. Rook to d3. Quan lifts his rook up, trying to prevent any kind of b3 ideas maybe, but we see a3. A complete bind on this position now. We have completed the connect 4 with the dark squared pawns. Quan goes for king to d2, desperately trying to get under these rapidly advancing pawns. However, there's pressure on here. Both of your pieces are tied down to this. There is also pressure on this pawn. Tate just moves his king in. I mean, you want to get under these pawns, fine, but you're going to concede the way in for my king. And then after you move your bishop, because it's hanging, what else are you going to do? I'm going to take. Of course you can't take, because then takes here, takes. And I don't need to explain why this endgame's winning. Hopefully, I'm going to go and take this pawn. And then I have a 4-on-1. So Tate finally manages to capture this pawn. Now, I really like this moment because it's almost like this whole game has been leading to this moment where the d-pawn falls. And now the d-pawn's fallen. There are 2 connected passed pawns and a potential 3 and 4 passed pawns if we can win this pawn over here. So Quan moves his king under again. We see the knight fork, the rook and the bishop. The rook gives a check. The king then takes another pawn. The bishop gives a check. And after the king moves, does the bishop want to take here? Absolutely not, because oh dear, your pawn has completely fallen on a2. All of these pawns are now passed. There will be nothing you can do to stop me just promoting here. So the bishop can't take. The king moves across to hold the a2 pawn. We see bishop g6, a beautifully timed forcible trading of the light square bishops, pinning it to the king. Bishop takes, the pawn takes. And Tate is left with all of these pawns. The king has been forced to go back to b1 to defend this horribly fixed a2 pawn, which that bishop just held pressure on for the entire time, and a knight to dance around. What is this rook going to do on its own? The king comes up now, the bishops are off the board, but d5, and it begins. I'm sure you see where this is going. The king comes in again. The knight jumps in. Oh, he's hung his knight. No, because c4 forks the rook here, and this is completely winning, obviously, for black. So Quan can't take that knight. The king just moves because otherwise this is going to be a threat, but he'll push it forward anyway. He'll now outpost the knight on d3. The rook moves a check. The king comes in. What, you going to give me a check? I wanted to march in anyway. Here, the knight comes back to hold this pawn. I mean, let's not give white any passed pawns. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. There is no need to give white any chance in this game. There is no need to push forward with these pawns, allow this to hang, and maybe we have to worry about something. No, this is a suffocation. The rook drops back to g1. We then see d4. The pawns are marching forward. This king has just no squares that it can move to forward in the position. This is absolutely disgusting. Rook e1 check. King to d5, sliding, hiding under the pawns that are somehow now on d4, c4, and b4. Rook f1 to hit the knight. d3 check. The king has to move. King goes up to defend the knight. I mean, this is just ridiculous. Here we see Quan desperately lashing out with h4, trying to do something, to try somehow to create a passed pawn. Maybe he sacrifices here and tries to march this to... It is to no avail. Check. The king goes back, and the final move of the game, b3. And in this position, Quan resigned. Now, I know if this was me at my age of 19 years old, I would have started crying. I cannot imagine how an 11-year-old child felt looking at this position on a chessboard. The point is, if you take, Tate can just push. And if there's a check, then we just go here. This is going to promote to a queen or a rook or whatever you want, because we still have 2 pawns here. The king tries to come across. This is checkmate in 2 different ways. You can also win the rook. There's also a check just for fun. It's just absolutely disgusting. If you don't take this, I'm just going to walk past. I'm just going to walk past. You give a check again, we just hide under here. What are you going to do? You go back, hit my knight. I can literally walk past and hang this knight most likely because I'm going to promote on here. In fact, there is a line where I push past, hang the knight, go here, and after you sack the rook with check, the king goes across and we go king here and just say goodbye to any sense of escape. The king and pawns do their job basically as if they were a rook, defending any way for the king to breathe. The king will move, we promote to a rook, and it's game. So it was in this position, of course, with a forced mate in 7 on the board, that Jaquan resigned and Emory Tate played an absolutely crushingly disgusting exchange sacrifice that he then converted. I mean, just look at the final position. I like games like this where instead of having some spark of brilliancy halfway through it and then it kind of peters out into a standard checkmating pattern, the game builds and builds and builds until it ends with the culmination of all of the ideas that have been happening throughout the game. When the final position is the most visually dazzling, that's when you know it's a good game. And yeah, he forced an 11-year-old child to resign here and then just left the tournament. He didn't play another round in this tournament. I do not know what happened, but in the database, this is the only game he played in the tournament, and I don't think the database is incomplete. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe, check out the channel memberships, and if you are interested in personal chess coaching from me, if you like the way I talk about chess, like the way I teach chess, then let me know in the comments and I will put your name on the pre-release priority list. Thanks so much for watching again. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.